you say
Basically, people who share certain views, and are sometimes will take into consideration, income levels. So districts that are relatively homogeneous in terms of being either poor voters or middle class voters or wealthier voters. I mean, that's something we take into consideration. And demographically similar voters, I guess, is what I'd say.
I'd like to step back just to one quick part where you were talking about the Latino representatives in the Senate. As majority leader, you do have control over you do have control over committee assignments, don't you?
Yeah.
And do any of the Latino senators hold committee assignments?
Yeah, they do, and both of them have. I can't remember exactly what they are, but they've got pretty good committee assignments, and you probably have that information.
Right, and
they got the committees that they wanted.
Okay. Back to your plans for after you leave the state senate. Paragraph 4 of affidavit A, it says that you do plan on running in CD3 in your current plan. In Congressional District 3 under the benchmark plan, would you have a good chance of being elected in that district?
I think I'd probably have a fair chance of winning. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to lay a percentage on it. There's a lot that can change over the course of a campaign. Depends in part on who you're running against. So, I don't know that I want to speculate too much, but I think the current district is probably better for me than the other one.
Do you think the current district as it stands right now under the 2002 plan is better for you than the plan that you created?
No, the opposite.
Okay. So you think that
the current district, meaning the one that we enacted into law as part of SB 123, that district is better for me.
Is better for you than the old one.
Yeah.
And you've said that you've had exclusive control with Neil in creating that plan. Is that true?
Oh, I don't know if I said I had exclusive control. I think I was the one who's mainly responsible, along with Neil, for drawing districts and choosing between them. But nothing's exclusive control in the legislature because everybody ultimately has to sign off on it at the end of the day, and those of my party did.
I just have a couple of questions. Speaking of the voting software, is there any way to track the plans that were made? Was there like a save button or a paper trail of the plans that were generated?
We certainly didn't print out all the plans that we contemplated, and I can't speak directly to whether there's I'm not sure whether there's some way of going back and reconstructing all that. There might be. I just don't know the software features all that well.
Okay, and I just have an additional question. You mentioned that both you and Neil are attorneys and familiar with the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the 2006 amendments that were added?
I mean, I'm generally familiar with the language, and I couldn't read it back to you or cite chapter and verse, but we certainly read the language, the current language of Section 5.
Okay, and part of that language states that minority voters would be able to vote for their preferred candidate of choice. How would you define that for Latino voters?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion. You can answer the question. Okay. I mean, I don't know how to read it beyond what the language says.
Okay. Well, based on voting history, in how have the Latino voters voted?
Almost, I won't say exclusively, but overwhelmingly Democratic.
And in primary elections for Democrats, have any Latino Democratic candidates prevailed over an Anglo-Saxon candidate?
I'm sorry, say that again. In primary election.
In Democratic primaries?
Yeah.
Have any Latino Democratic candidates prevailed over an Anglo-Saxon candidate?
Yeah.
Yes.
In congressional races?
No. Anybody want to ask me about any documents? Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I have one more.
Yeah.
Were you aware that there's, you said that you were aware of racial animus in Farmington, North know then why they were combined in one district?
Well, I think that was a district that we created, you know, if I recall correctly, it's a majority Democratic district, and there are substantial Democratic populations in both of those places, so we wanted to combine them.
Let's see. What were your reasons for holding the redistricting session behind closed doors?
Well, I wanted to control the process, basically, and I didn't want too much being said about it by my colleagues, including those on my side of the aisle. And, you know, there are a lot of legal landmines here when it comes to redistricting. You know, various ways in which you can potentially violate the law. There's one person, one vote, Voting Rights Act, Section 2 and Section 5, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I'm not going to say that the members of my constituency are intelligent, but they're not, and I mean, you know, other legislators. They're intelligent, but they're not necessarily experts, and I didn't want them saying things that were going to be based on partial information and might ultimately be used against us in court.
Just wondering if you were confident that your eventual proposals wouldn't run afoul of any laws, including voting rights laws. Couldn't you have held the proceedings open to the public?
I think that would have been, from my perspective, a strategic mistake, because if we run everything publicly, you know, people are going to get tied to a particular way of drawing the plan that may be in their interest but isn't necessarily in other people's interests. And from my perspective, that just invites trouble, and it invites people in the heat of moment to say things that they may not really mean, but that could be used against us later in future litigation. So I tried to shut that down as much as I could by by basically making the decisions about what plan would be proposed to the legislature behind closed doors. And they ultimately had to all sign on, at least everybody from my party, and they did.
Just one final follow-up question to that. You mentioned some of the political and legal landmines that you wanted to avoid by holding these sessions behind closed doors. Is it true that one of those quote-unquote landmines could have potentially been compliance with the Voting Rights Act? That was something that you were...
Yes. We go to Alejandro and then Brian.
Do you have any pieces of paper or emails between you and Neil, or you and other legislators that had a significant interest in drawing up the plan that you've enacted, that the Democrats have enacted?
Emails, I don't think so. Neil and I communicated